My people, day 15. We've been doing this for 15 days. Thank you for the support and the love. And I'm grateful for my friend Benali also for doing this, making out this setup. It's really good to know when people and your friends actually support you. I hope you also have good friends like me, Anyway, so your useless fact of the day. Do you know that the cat is the only domesticated animal that is not mentioned in the Bible? Check the verse. I can wait. All right, on to the story of today. If you're joining us for the very first time, the reason why we are doing this is to go through this book. It's called Petals of Emotion, that I happen to be an author of. And it looks at the 3 themes of life: God, love, and country. And for these 25 days, we're looking at the first theme, and that is of God. And today we are doing poem number 15. If you want a copy of the book, you can contact me and I'll have it delivered to you. So poem number 15, it's called Stars. Abraham, like the stars, your sons will dot the universe, beautiful like twinkling diamonds, each apart, but their matter lies in sticking together, bantam of light candles forming a cluster of light, sculpting the dome of the earth with the effusion of beauty, a marvel of its darkest moments. Abraham, remind your sons and the daughters and daughters of yours. Beauty isn't defined by the difference in color emission, but rays shone with each one's corner. A waltz exciting the conductor's baton. Only then will I know their enemies, and the promises I made for you will come true. God is in the business of unifying humanity. When God created Adam and Eve, he wanted to have one race, one people who spoke the same language, but because of the consequences of sin, we start seeing people dividing themselves up. Sin dividing even brothers, because a few months later, we see a brother killing another brother. So sin actually started dividing people. We see people trying to make the biggest tower, and now we have tribes being scattered everywhere. And sin has always been a reason why people scatter away. But the poem here tries to tell Abraham to remind his children that God wants his people to love and to walk together in unity. He says, like light and candles forming a cluster of light. One candle can do good, but if you have several candles in a room, it brightens the whole place. One star is good, but when you have thousands and billions of them in the sky, it looks like really, really amazing. And so that is what this poem is trying to tell us. Because it says, Abram, remind your sons and daughters of this. Beauty isn't defined by the difference in color emission, but rays shown in each one corners. It doesn't matter if you're blue, if you're green, if you're white. What matters is that when you come together, that colors is amazing. The rainbow is not beautiful because it is one color. The rainbow is beautiful because it has different colors. And God says that when these children of Abraham come together, that is when God will know their enemies. Because when you love one another and when you take care of one another from the Abrahamic lineage, then in that way, it just really eliminates sinners in itself, because God is love, and when you claim to have love, it settles in your heart. And this really forms actually the story of today, because for the past 3 days we've been looking at real life stories. And just to really emphasize, and this is the first time probably we're doing this, just to really emphasize the poem of today, I want to read a real life story of an army that actually fought itself. And this story is set in the late 1800s. So there was a battle between the Ottomans, which is the present-day Turkey, and the Austrian army. And they were battling for a control of a river, the Danube River, actually, as you know it. So at the Battle of this Karansebes, the Austrians were in battle against the Ottoman Empire for control of the Danube River, as I've said. On the night of September 17th, Austrian cavalrymen went on to scout a patrol for Turkish soldiers. But while out, the soldiers came upon a group of travelers that had set up camp along the other side of the river. The travelers offered the soldiers a drink in order to appease the weary men after a day's work. The soldiers accepted, and thus began a night of heavy drinking. At one point during the festivities, a group of infantrymen happened upon the drinkers and asked to join. When they were denied alcohol, a fist fight erupted. Before long, the fight escalated and shots were allegedly fired. Back in town of Karansebes, where there was no drinking, no fighting, and no festivities, the rest of the Austrian army was on alert for Turkish forces. When they heard the shots fired from across the river, the sober Austrian forces naturally interpreted the rockers to be the Turks. They began to scream, "Turks, Turks, Turks." Across the river, the drunken forces heard their comrade cry of Turks and rushed back to camp to assist their fellow soldiers, believing that their cries to be pleas for help. Seeing the approaching mass of men in the dark, the sober forces opened fire, believing the drunken soldiers to be the invading enemy of Turks. Upon being fired, the drunken forces believed their camp to have been overtaken by the Turks and in turn fired back at them. Whether because they realized the mistake that had transpired or simply because they wanted the firing to stop, a few German officers had shouted, "Halt!" which means stop in German. But due to the language barrier, as the army was made up of Austrian men, Czech Republic Army, Germany, France, Croatia, Serbia, and Poland, non-German soldiers believed that German soldiers to be shouting Allah, which is what the Turks were known to shout during the battle or a cry to God. Instead of ceasing the firing, the cries simply fueled it. The chaos reigned in the Austrian camp, and thus the Battle of Karansebe raged. From a combination of inebriation, darkness, and language barrier, the entire Austrian army battled itself. By the end of the night, roughly thousands of Austrian men were led to death. It is estimated that even more than 10,000 people died. By morning, the Austrians realized that what had happened. Unfortunately, by then, the damage was done and thousands of soldiers had perished in the friendly, albeit chaotic fire. The army had thus made itself vulnerable. So when the Turks really invaded just 2 days later, their planned attack proved unnecessary. Almost the entire Austrian army was incapacitated, leaving the city defenses down and Karansebe open for the taking, which was exactly what the Turkish army did. You see, same army fighting each other because one was drunk, the other one wasn't drunk. And so it made it easy for the attacks to take over the camp. And that really reminds of the poem that we were sharing, that when there's unity, and we all know this, and when there's love, and when people work together, we actually achieve more. When we have all these barriers and we want to separate ourselves from each other because of tribe or anything else, we lose even more. And what is the verse of today? The verse of today comes from John 13:35, and it says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Have a good night and see you tomorrow.